Colonization is a process by which one nation establishes control over another territory and its people. The colonizing power often dominates the political, economic, and cultural systems of the colonized nation. This process often involves the exploitation of resources, labor, and sometimes the direct oppression or even genocide of the native populations. Colonization typically occurs for various reasons: political power, economic gain, and sometimes under the guise of spreading religion or civilization. European nations, beginning in the 15th century, played a major role in colonizing large parts of the world, leaving a legacy that still affects us today. Let's now turn to some specific examples of colonization in different parts of the world to better understand its global impact. One of the most notable examples of colonization in Asia is the British colonization of India. The British East India Company began its influence in India in the early 1600s through trade and gradually established military and political control over large parts of the subcontinent. By 1858, after the Indian Rebellion, the British Crown took direct control of India, marking the beginning of the British Raj. During this time, India was not just a political colony, but also an economic one. British rulers exploited Indian resources and labor, primarily through the forced production of cash crops like cotton, tea, and opium, which was sold on the international market. Indian industries like textiles were devastated to benefit British economic interests. The British also imposed their legal systems, educational models, and English as a dominant language, often at the expense of local traditions and institutions. The resistance to British rule in India led to many uprisings, and eventually, through the leadership of figures like Mahatma Gandhi, India gained its independence in 1947. However, the scars of colonization, including ethnic and religious divisions, remain visible even today. Colonization in Africa occurred later than in other parts of the world, but it was no less devastating. The Berlin Conference of 1884-1885 marked the formal partitioning of Africa by European powers, a process we often refer to as the Scramble for Africa. During this conference, European nations like Britain, France, Germany, and Belgium divided the African continent, drawing arbitrary borders without regard for the existing ethnic, cultural, or linguistic divisions. This led to the establishment of European colonies across the continent, and by 1914, nearly 90% of Africa was under European control. One of the most infamous examples of this colonization was the Belgian Congo, where King Leopold II of Belgium turned the Congo into his personal colony. Under his rule, the native population was brutally exploited, especially in the production of rubber. It's estimated that millions of Congolese died from forced labor, starvation, and disease under Belgian rule. Across the continent, colonization led to the extraction of resources such as gold, diamonds, rubber, and ivory. It also imposed foreign systems of governance, education, and religion, displacing traditional African institutions. Though African countries gained independence in the mid-20th century, the legacy of colonization, such as unstable political borders, economic dependence, and cultural erasure, continues to affect these nations. Colonization wasn't limited to Asia and Africa. Now let's focus on Native Americans. When European settlers arrived in the Americas in the late 15th century, they began a process of colonization that radically changed the lives of indigenous people. The Spanish, French, British, and Portuguese were among the main colonial powers in the Americas, and their arrival spelled disaster for the native populations. In what is now the United States, British colonization had a particularly destructive impact on Native American communities. Native populations were pushed off their ancestral lands through wars, treaties that were often broken, and forced migrations, such as the infamous and deadly Trail of Tears. Europeans introduced new diseases like smallpox, to which Native Americans had no immunity, leading to a massive decline in population. Some estimates suggest that up to 90% of the native population was wiped out by European diseases alone. Culturally, colonizers attempted to civilize Native Americans through forced assimilation. Native children were taken from their families and placed in boarding schools where they were forbidden from speaking their languages or practicing their traditions. This form of cultural colonization aimed to erase Native American identities and replace them with European ways of life. Economically, Native Americans lost access to their lands, which was central to their way of life, leading to widespread poverty and dependency on the U.S. government. Though Native Americans continue to fight for their rights, land, and sovereignty, the effects of colonization are still deeply felt in Native communities today. As we can see from these examples, colonization was not just the taking of land. It was a complex process that involved the exploitation of resources, suppression of cultures, and displacement of entire populations. Colonization has left a legacy of economic inequality, cultural erasure, and political instability that still shapes much of the world today. Understanding colonization helps us recognize how historical injustices continue to affect nations and communities, but it also highlights the resilience of colonized peoples. Resistance movements in India, Africa, and Native American societies fought back against these injustices, leading to movements for independence, cultural revival, and justice that continue to inspire and inform us today. Thanks for watching. If you found this video informative, please like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more content as we continue exploring important historical and contemporary issues that shape our world. Peace and Black Power.